We are very happy to host Max Rietkerk. Max is a professor in spatial ecology and global change, and he has been working a lot on ambiguity of tipping points and whether they're real or not. I think so, and also how ecosystems become more resilient. So, yeah, Max will tell us about his recent work. Thank you, Max, for coming.
Thanks, Fernando, for inviting me. I'm happy to talk here. So the title of my talk is Resilient Pathways for Ambiguous Tipping Points. And the outline of my talk is as follows. I will start out about ecosystem tipping points. As I'm an ecologist, I will give you a brief background of how this idea of tipping points came about into ecology. I will tell a little bit about early warning signals. Then I will move on to what happens if you include the spatial scale. And I want to talk about climate tipping points, because this idea of tipping points that as I know, originated from ecology, but I think it originated much earlier from physics. But the ecologists are a bit behind, and the climate scientists are a bit behind ecologists, because then they applied the concept of tipping points to climate system elements. And then I will end with my take-home message. Yeah, so first about ecosystem tipping points. So actually an important paper in ecology is a paper by Neumayer about grazing systems. Back in 1975, he published this paper in the Journal of Ecology about the stability of grazing systems, in which he basically analyzed what you see here on the x-axis is the vegetation population, so to say. And on the y-axis, it's the growth of vegetation, which is a logistic function, which is just in time, it's just the logistic growth. And then what he plotted in there is also the what we call an ecology functional response, is the intake of the cattle as a function of the availability of the vegetation, right? And that is typically a saturation curve like this. And what he did in this analysis is just to analyze the configuration of this growth and consumption curves, so to say, and when they intersect, you have, of course, an equilibrium. And then he moved on to analyze whether the equilibria are stable or unstable. And then you come to this quite well-known configuration that you have here the growth equation, and here's the saturation function of the functional response of the cattle in this case. And then you get two equilibria which are stable and one unstable equilibrium in between. So you have this multiple stable states idea and a threshold in between, right? And this was an eye-opener for a lot of ecologists, because from here there was Robert May. I don't know if you know him. He passed away also, like Emmanuel Neumayer. And he actually took the model of Neumayer, and he moved on with the analysis, and also putting the vegetation on the x-axis and the growth and the consumption curves on the y-axis. And then he thought, what happens if you increase the number of cattle? So a meadow is a fence, right? And if you increase the number of cattle, what happens with the vegetation equilibrium? And you can see the equilibrium, at least a stable equilibrium, is here. You see? So and what he then did is he plotted the level of herbivory. So the low, intermediate, and high herbivory corresponds with low, intermediate, and high herbivory. And then he plotted the equilibrium of the vegetation as a function of this herbivory. And this is actually how this tipping point configuration emerged, at least in ecology, in which if you have a low herbivory, you have a high vegetation equilibrium, right? And if you increase your herbivory, you go to a lower equilibrium And then you have this tipping point at this point here. And then your equilibrium is gone, right? And you move towards another equilibrium. And this is where you have the tipping point. Right, so this is how, in ecology at least, this concept emerged. And then came Max Rietkerk, and he wrote this quite famous paper about catastrophic shifts in ecosystems with this ball and cup analogy. And if you project the stable equilibrium on the bottom of this plane, you get this same curve as you see here, right? And from 2001 onwards in ecology, this research on tipping points just exploded because of this paper. So we can project the bottom plane in a horizontal manner, and then you can see this figure that you always see appearing in the literature, right? Also, we can relate of resilience in this figure, because if you're far away, you have a high resilience because your basin of attraction is, right, which is basically the distance between the stable and the unstable equilibrium, or the distance between the cup and the mountain in this picture, starts to decrease when you move to the tipping point, right? So far from the tipping point, we say we have a high resilience because you perturb the system a lot and it goes back to the same equilibrium. And when you move towards the tipping point, your resilience becomes low. Right, and this is important because from this concept, a whole lot of early warning signals can be derived. Yeah, so when I started my PhD, actually, I started out with, as Han knows, I started out with studying catastrophe theory, which was developed by René Thom, in which you have the same kind of curves, right? With the tipping points and the stable and the unstable equilibrium. And actually, René Thom was a good friend of Salvador Dali, and they went to conferences together. And either they inspired each other. So even his last painting was actually an honor to his friend René Thom, in which he draw this catastrophe thought, so to say.
The butterfly.
And the butterfly, yeah. And after this painting, he catastrophically died.
Yeah.
Now that's that. Yeah, so I want to move on to early warning signals. So going back to this figure again. So here again, this fault bifurcation with the two tipping points. So you have bifurcation tipping, in which you move across the tipping point and your equilibrium vanishes and you move to the other tipping point here. But you can also have what we call noise-induced tipping. So if you are close to the tipping point, for example, and if you have like noise, you can accidentally move across the unstable equilibrium and move to the other equilibrium, right? So that is what we call noise tipping. And the tipping comes about in simple models, basically because of positive feedback. So typically in simple models, you can increase or decrease the strength of some positive feedback, and depending on the positive feedback, you have either more a linear system or more non-linear like that, or really with two tipping points like this. Right, and going back to this figure, that if you are closer to the tipping point, then your resilience starts to decrease. And from this, there has been the development of what we call early warning signals in time series. And this was already known a long time, actually, in physics and also in ecology already in the 80s. But again, Max Rietkerk wrote that depending on where you are located, if you are located close to the tipping point or far from the tipping point, you expect certain characteristics in your time series. So if you're far away from the tipping point, you have a high resilience and you have a fast recovery. and a low variance and a low autocorrelation. And if you move towards this tipping point, you have actually a slow recovery, a higher variance, and a high autocorrelation. So then the idea becomes, as has been analyzed in simple models, so this is again the model of Neumayer that I started out with. And if you increase harvest rate over time, and then you can move the system across the tipping point and the vegetation collapses, right? And what you can indeed see that the variance and the autocorrelation of this biomass increases in time along with approaching the tipping point. Because now we can see from looking at time series alone whether there's a tipping point in the system and how close we are to the tipping point, right? And along with the variance and the autocorrelation, there's a whole lot of other early warning signals being developed that are related all to what we call critical slowing down. Right, but there is a kind of a complication.
Is that a universal thing? Like you always have increased variance and not correlation? Is that the idea?
That's the idea. You always have that if you approach a tipping point. But first, that is not necessarily the case. But assuming that that happens, then you can see from time series alone that you are approaching a tipping point, right? But then, besides that, it can also happen that you approach tipping points and you have not this kind of dynamics because of other disturbing factors. You also have the fact that independent of whether you have a tipping point or a more linear change or a cusp, right? So again, decreasing your positive feedback loop. This increasing standard deviation and variance, or the increase in variance and autocorrelation happens independently of what kind of bifurcation you have, right? Because it's all related to the eigenvalue in your Jacobian matrix. So independent of the type of bifurcation, you have increasing variance or increasing autocorrelation. And this is in the literature, as I will show you later, forgotten a lot. It's just like being put under the carpet a lot.
And I think there's a second big problem, and that's more in terms of you really want to do prediction in the next time step.
Yeah.
And that's what you normally want to do. You really want to say, oh, maybe I'll go there. But
Indeed. So indeed, if you see this increasing variance, increasing autocorrelation, and whatever you will increase or decrease, it still has no absolute value towards where the tipping point is, right? So you still are like touching in the dark, like where is the cliff, right?
yeah, so the type 1, type 2 error and these types of things is just, even in the simulation, it's huge, let alone in parallel applications.
But I will come back to that.
Can you ask one more thing? Because
Sure.
you say that whether you have this catastrophic, non-catastrophic thing is the positive feedback loop. I'm not sure what you mean with this.
Well, I mean to say that in simple models, or at least there are simple models in which you have, for example, when you model vegetation and availability of water. And the availability of water is dependent on the vegetation, and you have, like, if you have more vegetation, you have more water. Therefore, you have more vegetation, right? If you have such a positive feedback, and you make a simple model out of it, you get this kind of dynamics. And if you remove that positive feedback, you actually remove this dynamics and you move to this kind of dynamics. And from simple models with this positive feedback, that is actually almost always the case, that you can relate this positive feedback to the occurrence of a tipping point or not. So, and then the strength of the positive feedback is basically determining what kind of
In your first example, there's negative feedback. So is it not just the strength of feedback?
it's the strength of positive feedback. You always also have negative feedback in the model, otherwise it won't always.
But in the case of the grazing cows,
In the case of the grazing cows, I don't have it right now adequately how that works in terms of positive feedback. But usually in that kind of simple models, there's a positive feedback that generates this kind of dynamics. I could, okay.
I think positive feedbacks gives rise to bistability, but the opposite is not true. And not always, like you can also find bistability without a positive feedback. But if you have positive feedback, then you will have this kind of dynamics.
Thank you. And then another kind of early warning signal what you encounter in the literature is, for example, when you have this noise tipping, so you have a very noisy system, right? This blue fluctuations, and when you approach a tipping point, then the system will spend time in the upper equilibrium and in the lower equilibrium. When you move towards the tipping point, this distribution will change, right? So you can actually see, like if you have this distribution, you know you are far from the tipping point, and if you have this distribution, is shifting, like right when you move towards the tipping point. And I will come back to this one because in ecology we like to do space for time substitution, as we call it, but then we study things along gradients instead of changing time, and we see the same kind of distributions appearing, right? And I will move now to that example, I think, yes. So until now I haven't talked about spatial scale, right? It's just a mysterious, well-mixed, homogeneous system. But I will give you an example how spatial scale changes all this. And I will go as an example to the forest savanna boundary. And there is the data that shows us this. So here we have the mean annual precipitation. And this is measurements of tree cover, right? And you see if you have a lot of rainfall, you have a high tree cover, which means you have a tropical forest. And then when you move along the spatial axis, move along a gradient of rainfall, then you go from 3 to 2 to 1, and you move into an area of lower vegetation cover, right? And the interesting thing here is that you can make frequency distributions of tree cover, and you see like this bimodal distribution, and you shift from the upper stable state to the lower stable state, so to say, right? This is how this is often being interpreted with data. Right, so you have actually bimodality and frequency distribution of closed and open tree cover, and there is a kind of lack of cover in between, right? So this is often being interpreted as bistability and a potential tipping point between tropical rainforest and savannas. And you see a lot in the literature, like warnings of especially the Amazon that could tip from a tropical forest into a savanna-like landscape, right? And the feedback that is being suggested here in this case is what we call the fire feedback. And the fire feedback works as follows. If you have a lot of grass, then the grass outcompetes the trees. And besides that, the grass is fuel for fire, and the fire prevents the trees from establishing. Right? But once you have trees, there's no grass because the trees outcompete the grass, and there's no fuel, therefore there's no fire, therefore it is good for the trees. Right? So you have this bistability in this system.
I'm totally into tree modality nowadays, so I see immediately trimodality here.
Yeah, but that might be, you are completely right, but that might be an artifact from the data. Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, that is.
The desert is 0 or not?
Yeah, the desert is 0. So there has been the models also making like trying to fit tri-stability, in which this is actually a grassland instead of a desert. But actually, it's related to all those zeros that you see here, and has been told to me that is an error in the data, and I don't exactly know where that comes from, but this is often being well, there is papers that do not neglect it, but later that has been.
And it does relate to yeah, that's not to say. Oh yeah, no, but it is higher at lower precipitation.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I don't know actually exactly where that comes from, but let's
Yeah.
forget about it for now. Yeah, but quite rightfully so. Yeah, almost tri-stability. So what happens in literature is then this data is being plotted. So the interesting thing is that you have this bimodal distribution, right, in tree cover. So there is, I mean, these are measurements, right? So these are satellite data. These are data of pixels of 30 by 30 meters, that's Landsat data. And you can plot these observations again along the axis of mean annual precipitation, and you see that for the whole rainfall range, you can either have open tree cover or closed tree cover, right? This is the open tree cover, and this is the closed tree cover, right? And because of this possible bistability for this whole range of rainfall, people are producing maps, right? So people can now map where are those bistable areas, right? And they make maps like this. And then I want to concentrate on the Congo Basin. So on the basis of this data, you can actually extrapolate that this whole area is currently forest, but as the data shows, it's bistable with open cover. So it's bistable with savanna. And also a large part of the Amazon is like that, right? So and what has been inferred from this, so if precipitation would change, then actually this whole Congo Basin could like collapse from a tropical rainforest to a savanna state, right? And the same is being claimed a lot for the Amazon Basin. Yeah, but now I want to remind you that this was data based on 30 by 30 meter pixels, right? And relating this data only to rainfall, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of other things than rainfall. So what we did, or actually Sam did that, one of our PhDs, he actually scaled the observation up to 10 by 10 kilometers, what we call landscape scale, right? Which we think is a more relevant scale of observation if you think about an ecosystem. And then what you see is what is homogeneously closed or what is homogeneously open, or what are landscapes that both contain closed and open tree cover pixels. It looks a lot different because now you see these are the completely open covers, these are the completely closed covers, and this is what we call coexistent states. So these are the 10 by 10 kilometers here in purple, right? 10 by 10 kilometers areas in which you find both open and closed tree cover in one spatial domain. Right? Can you follow that? So instead of only open or only closed, you have, of course, landscapes is both open and closed tree cover, right? Now, what you can see now is also you can map the areas where you have bistability between homogeneous and closed tree cover on a 10 by 10 kilometer scale. I think you can map that also on a map like this. So this is actually where there's unpredicted closed tree cover, and this is where there is unpredicted open tree cover, and where there is bistability, right? You can map that on the map. Now, and when you now look at how you could explain this unpredicted closed or unpredicted open tree cover, you just have to look at the soil and seasonality of rainfall, and you can already explain it for 99% where there is the closed and where there is the open tree cover, based on other variables than only rainfall. Well, this is also rainfall, but this is taking into account the seasonality of rainfall. Right, so the point being made here is when you increase your spatial scale, your bistability actually vanishes. It's gone. For, well, I would say almost 100%. Right?
What do you mean by unpredicted?
That is
So this is
where you would expect open tree cover based on if you are left of this crossing or at the right of this crossing. So here you expect open tree cover, but you observe here closed tree cover on a 10 by 10 kilometer strip. That is weird because it's against expectation, but actually we can explain that because, for example, of types of soil or types of seasonality or other factors that explain that. So it's not a weird positive feedback of fire. And depending on what the initial condition is, you get either forest or savanna. No, it's just a deterministic, determined by soil or by something else, then a positive feedback. Right?
But is this taking another spatial scale? This spatial scale in this case is kind of averaging process.
You can say that. Yes.
And yeah, what's the right scale? So
Yeah,
of course, if you go to an enormous scale, then there's nothing there anymore.
Yeah.
So why is your new scale better than the old scale?
Very good question, actually. And that is a matter of what are your relevant system boundaries, right? So it is quite arbitrary. And actually, what we are now looking into is into exactly the same problem, not only here in the Congo, but also in the Amazon, also in Indonesia and Asia. And actually, this bistability already vanishes, if I know by heart already, at 1 kilometer scale. The point here is that if you look at a landscape like this, you see an ecosystem, right? I mean, I think an ecosystem is more like this scale than a 30 by 30 kilometer scale or 30 by 30 meter scale. Well, depending on if you are an ant, then you have a different landscape than if you are a human, right? And if you are someone from outer space, you see the whole Earth and hopefully has. So there is a discussion here. But we think that this is in terms of ecosystems, a more relevant scale to look at, because what we can now do is within those landscapes, we can actually predict quite accurately whether you have a closed tree cover or an open tree cover, for example, based on topography. So, for example, this specific landscape, and we can give you thousands of examples, actually the occurrence of tree cover is in the lower elevations where there is more water. Right, so it has nothing to do with high stability or with some kind of positive feedback. It's just determined by topography, in this case by water availability. Right, so and you can do that for all the landscapes of 10 by 10 kilometer that we analyzed, and you can see the mean accuracy of our predicted model is around 75% that you can predict purely on the basis of topography, and sometimes even close to 100%. That is completely determined by topography. So again, we are looking now into this problem for the whole world in terms of tropical savanna and tropical forest and savanna boundaries. And the preliminary results show that indeed a lot can be explained by topography, and the bistability is already gone, like already when have areas of 1 by 1 kilometer. So your bistability basically, if you look at it on a landscape scale, which we think is a more relevant scale than the 30 by 30 meter scale, then your tipping point idea actually completely vanishes. Right, so if you think about this figure that you see a lot, so either you have tropical forest or you have savanna and you have multiple stable states. Actually, you have a whole range of what we call coexistence landscapes in between it. So there is no such thing that, I mean, you move over a hill and then you tip towards the other. No, I mean, there is a spatial rearrangement of your tree cover in this case, instead of a black and white kind of picture in which suddenly over the whole Congo basin, the whole tree cover distribution shifts from a high cover to a low cover. No, this will never happen. This will never happen.
But I guess the question that Ben also mentioned before is it not about the landscapes? Because couldn't you have this tipping point picture on a more local scale?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So it is yes, I think that if you look at still, if you look at the 30 by 30 meter scale, there might be this kind of tipping dynamics. Yes. And also there is still this thing that we need to explain, this bimodality of the tree cover distribution, like which is reflected in the quite sharp boundaries. If you look at these landscapes, quite sharp boundaries between the forest patches and the savanna patches. So that these are still things that could be explained by bistability and by some positive feedback, but at a very limited scale. Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of very simplistic models, if you take the icing model for phase transitions, without spatial structure, you have a very discrete, traditional cusp-like change. But if you do it spatially, then indeed you see this, that it's not going fast, but you see this clustering and that clusters get bigger, bigger, bigger. But that's basically it.
Yes, yes. I think the same thing. Yeah, so I would like to move on to climate tipping points, because this idea of coexisting states is also relevant. It's a general kind of concept, and also applicable to climate tipping elements. So in 2008, Tim Lenton came along and he published this paper about tipping elements in the climate system. And he actually took the tipping point idea and he extrapolated it to what he calls climate system elements. And this was the first map they produced, and this map is being reproduced all the time and being adapted all the time, but this was the original picture. For example, here have the Amazon rainforest, which has been argued actually dominated by positive feedback, because not only the fire feedback as I explained, but also what they call the rainfall feedback, because if you have a lot of trees, there's a lot of evapotranspiration and a lot of moisture in the atmosphere, which rains back. So there is a positive feedback there, which is really, you can measure that, and it's really a positive feedback, right? Same in the Congo basin. I mean, it's a general phenomenon. So, and there is this Greenland ice sheet, for example, and the positive feedback there is this albedo. So if you have a white surface, there's a lot of reflectance. If you have a black surface, there's a lot of absorption. And there's positive feedback. The more white you have, the cooler it is, and the more black it is, the hotter it is. So this is also a tipping element, right? And there's a lot more that can be identified that I don't know the details of. But the idea is basically that. And then if we take this idea of early warning signals that I introduced, then people start to analyze time series, right? And remember, what they look at is only at the time series. So they don't have any knowledge about the red curve, besides that they know or that they think that there is a positive feedback going on in such a system, right? And so people look at these kind of system elements and look at time series data and then start to produce papers like this. And these are recent papers in high profile journals that cause a lot of concern in the media also, and also among scientists, and actually also with me, because I mean, what are we looking at, right? But what they are looking at is actually at the blue stuff. And then they stop here, and then they say, wow, this system is going to collapse. Yeah. And even there are, so this is like about the Amazon, but the AMOC, you know, the AMOC is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. And also the Greenland ice sheet, exactly the same time, even the same people sometimes. Yeah, because you only have to look at the blue fluctuations, and you can write papers like this, right?
When you said the climate elements, what did you mean by climate? Just a
The
specific.
Greenland ice sheets,
Yeah, just a
the
specific.
Sahel, the Amazon, the AMOC, those Antarctic ice sheets, those they call climate differently. But apparently, what actually people in other disciplines already largely know, that what we did is we took a very simple model of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, and we did an analysis in terms of when there is a tipping point or when there is no tipping point. Again, tuning this positive feedback in this very simplified model of the AMOC. Then we could actually show those early warning signals, right? This is the time series that they analyze. Whether you have a tipping point or whether you have no tipping point, you find exactly the same signal. So again, what are we looking at if we see that, right? So we have no clue what we are looking at actually. So whether we are looking at this or at this or at this time series, they could produce exactly the same kind of dynamics based on the same theory, namely the series critical slowing down based on the Jacobian matrix and the eigenvalues of it, which is not a property of any real system, of course, but just a mathematical concept in our head. Yeah.
So this goes back to the first slide that you were saying, you know, these early warning signals are not universal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, they are two universal.
Or, yeah, sure. They're not specific.
They're not
tipping points.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're two universal. And even independent of that, you can actually reproduce the same early warning signals depending on how you treat the data or what happens in a real system in terms of variability. I mean, there can be a zillion alternative explanations for these early warning signals to appear in your data, right? As is shown here by some examples. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and I would add again that even if you are sure, if you go one slide back, even if you're for other reasons sure that you have to, you are in case A, then still it's,
You are in?
if you have reasons to believe you have case A,
Yes.
for instance, you have to predict an earthquake, which has.
Then still you don't know where the earthquake is. No,
And still you have no clue.
no, you have no clue.
You can see, okay, parents.
No, there are claims otherwise.
Yeah,
Yeah, there are claims otherwise. I can tell you exactly which paper it is. This paper, and this is extremely worrying actually. And this paper goes further, and they come with a specific prediction when the collapse will occur. Read it.
okay, now.
They claim it
When is it? Which year?
around 2015.
And then also the.
And there's more people who do that.
Yeah, sorry.
And this causes a lot of like the Guardian, New York Times, I don't know what kind of 8 o'clock news in the Netherlands, right?
These Danish people.
All it's Danish people, it's even a couple in this case. No, but they're very serious scientists, I must say, because they produce a lot of nice, interesting papers. But this paper, they just finished it, I think. Yeah, and the puzzling thing is that I have the idea that, I don't know, that,
Excuse me, sir.
yes,
Back to your vegetation transition problem, where you analyze different scales in space.
yes,
I noticed it seems to me that you are always assuming that there is a distance between the two TP points in the previous problem. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
you mean there, yes, yes,
So, is it possible to have a transition point with no tipping points as well in the vegetation problem?
yes,
And because as far as I could understand you, the figures you showed before, you only have this transition assuming that there are two different tipping points. In the pictures you showed, you have, for example, vegetation of one biome and the vegetation of another biome. In the middle, you assume that there is a kind of coexistence between the two biomes.
Yes.
Right?
yes.
But I haven't seen any, for example, transition inside the coexistence of the two biomes for no tipping points. At least I couldn't see it in the figures.
I'm not sure if I follow you.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if I follow you.
Can you go back to the
Here, this one?
Yeah, but there is you have a picture where you show exactly a map, for example, yeah, exactly like this one. So the purple region is the coexistence.
Coexistence region, yeah. So it's where there are pixels both open and closed.
Yeah, so but you are always assuming that inside this coexistence region, you have two different tipping points. You are
No.
either in one minima or either in.
No, here I don't assume anything. I just look at the data. I don't assume anything. I just look at the data and we plot it. And for the rest, we don't assume anything here. It's just that the purple areas, they contain at least overlapping open and closed tree cover. So they have at least 95%.
Maybe then it's in the definition of open and closed.
Well, that is not, I mean, that's not so mysterious. Because that is derived from here, that you have this bimodality. So everything above 60% you call closed, and everything below 60% you call open. Because of this distribution. So that's completely accepted.
So
Also by the people that show this tipping points.
Inside the purple region, you cannot guarantee, for example, if you have different tipping points or not. For example, if
where our position is basically you don't have tipping points. If you go from the tropical forest to the savanna, you have just a spatial reconfiguration of your open and closed tree cover. So if you are close to the tropical forest, you have relatively a lot of open tree cover, or a lot of closed tree cover, and relatively few open, right? And this shifts step by step when you move to the savanna. And it's not that you go from forest, boom, to savanna. Right? It's a continuous process, which everybody can see if you fly over it. Basically. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. And this is again a general kind of.
Because I was asking this because it seems for physicists that this kind of transition, when you have two separate tipping points, first order phase transition, and when they merge, exactly at the point where they merge, we have a second order phase transition, and they have very specific characteristics when you pose it exactly at this point where the tipping points merge, like fractal structure. I was wondering, for example, if you could observe these fractal structures in biomes, for example, in the vegetation, it would be a signature of that you're exactly at the transition between exactly at the merging of the tipping points.
Yeah, so I'm not really familiar about this physics, to be honest, but there are a lot of papers that show all kinds of self-organized structures, including ring structures and wave structures and this kind of structures. So I can imagine that this kind of structures are on a kind of a boundary between two biomes or something like that.
Mhm.
So there is papers coming out looking into this, but I'm not really familiar with the theory behind it, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so back, what is the time?
Okay.
No,
We have 15 minutes, yeah. Or you can also go on later.
I'll be finalizing, I think. So back to the climate tipping elements, right? Are they really tipping elements? Are they tipping or not? And if so, in environmental sciences, we have this scenarios, right? What happens in time with CO2? So we have what we call the Paris scenario, right? We have the what we call Trump scenario, in which CO2 will keep increasing, and we have the intermediate scenario. And then we can have, there is a whole lot of climate models, which are really complex Earth system models, so to say, in which they can observe what happens if you simulate from pre-industrial CO2 up to, well, in this case, up till 2100. Right, and this is analysis by a guy from the KMI, Sigurd Rijfout, and he ran 37 of those climate models, looking at those three scenarios and running that until 2100. And then the analysis that at which model collapsed in a tipping point kind of way, right? And then he did that for all kinds of climate system elements. But I would want to focus now, for now, on the AMOC, because I will move on to the AMOC a little bit. And they show that the AMOC collapsed in one model out of 37 models, right? And then interestingly, that this paper is being cited a lot as an evidence for tipping points. Well, the point of this paper was actually, well, you have an AMOC collapse in only 1 out of 37 models, so calculate the probability of collapse, right, in those models. Which is, well, but then,
That is not the same paper you pointed out in the beginning.
no, this is a different paper. This is a different paper. So I consider this a very serious paper. Yeah. This is a different paper. It's just a paper that they do a really a systematic analysis of all climate models, all relevant climate models. What happens is if you increase your CO2 from pre-industrial values up till 2100, in this case, and what happens with those climate system elements? Do they collapse or do they not collapse? And here they show that only 1 out of 37 models this animal collapsed, meaning you have probability 1 divided by 37 of an animal collapse. Well, at least you could argue that, right? Based on the models. And this is the best models that they have. There are no better models. Basically. But then what is interesting is that
models correlated?
sorry?
Are the models correlated? I mean,
No, they are, as far as I know, well, there's the same knowledge in all models.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, the same physics.
Yeah, but I know, well, this is a long time back, but then there were these climate models and they used each other's software. So then you had the Australian climate model, which looked a lot like the American climate model.
Yeah, then I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not into this business actually.
No,
I'm only
but if that would be true, then then there's a sort of a that there's only 1 out of 37. If from those 37, 30 are correlated, then
no, that will not be the case. That will not be the case. That will not, I'm a little bit an annoying outsider, to be honest.
Yeah.
But that is not the case, no. And I know quite well his papers and also him personally, so I know that this is not, that never comes up. That never comes up.
But how I'm going to read this slide, so
You read this- You read the slide, for example, there are 37 models, there are 3 scenarios per model, so there are 37 times 3 runs. And for how many runs do you observe a tipping point in specific climate system elements in the models? Well, they are all being claimed as tipping elements. Well, this shows, if you look at the AMOC only collapses in one model.
And these are all spatial models.
They're all spatial models. So they're all complex spatial models, including oceans, atmosphere, vegetation, not all vegetation, but they're all spatial models. So it means that this, and then even in this kind of collapse, Sieber Drijfvaart actually just stays away from this tipping point idea, because he says even in the models I cannot prove it whether it's a tipping or not. I mean, I don't know how to prove that, and it's actually impossible to prove that it's a tipping point or not. He just calls it, as I show you in the next slide. Oh, no, it's not written, I think.
So the tipping element does not come from the climate models, to be clear. Like they only come from conceptual models, I guess.
Exactly. Well, there is an early paper in which they show in Hamburg, a model in Hamburg, in which they show in such a model that depending on initial conditions, you can get either a vegetated Sahara or a bare Sahara. So there are some indications also in the climate models. I want to move on to this paper, because this paper just appeared in 2025.
I still have two questions about the last one.
Okay, fair enough.
So one indeed is that, yeah, so if I take a stylized model, let's take this IC model on a lattice, then indeed, it all depends on the connectivity in the system. So if there's only local interactions, then the whole phase transition smooths out. And then you don't have this classic tipping point, or it's still in a certain sense there. But it depends a lot on the way the lattice is organized and how much connections is there. Secondly, they also work, and also I think in your group, where people look at these cascading transitions. So you look at these, and then you have locally you can have a transition, and that this can also cascade.
Yeah.
And that's an alternative way to look at this.
Yeah,
So there are phase transitions at a lower scale, and these cascade, but then these cascades also takes time. So if you look at large scales, then you don't see the phase transition anymore, but they are there if you look at the right way.
Probably. Right. Yeah, I can follow you, but I will say a little bit more about this cascades also, if I don't take too much of your time. Point of this figure is that they redid this analysis with all those models and all those scenarios. But now they run it until 2300. And of course the models changed in the meanwhile. And now they show that if you look at, I know by heart, if you look at the Paris scenario, which is the blue scenario in this case, it is now 21% of the models that collapse instead of only 1 out of 37. So now there is a lot more collapse going on in the more recent models when run until 2300. Meaning there is a lot to worry about if you look at the AMOC, right? And then again, to emphasize that Sieber, he stays away, well, every now and then tipping appeared in the papers, but he stays away from the tipping idea. He says, I don't care whether it's tipping or not, I cannot prove it's tipping or not. Look at what's happening, that's worrying enough, right? We don't need a tipping to worry about this. And I completely follow this. It's nice to know that this is all models, and the only data we have is the blue bar, which is here. Right? This is the data that we have. Right? And even the trends that we can see in the data are not significant.
So the blue bar is this figure that you have there?
No, this is another data series, and this is based on model inferred data. So they go also to paleo data. And so this is model inferred data, and this is real direct observations. So that's the difference. And these are the data on which those other papers are based that warrant for tipping points. But here they refer to direct observations. So no model inferred, no paleo data, but direct observations of, in this case, temperature and salinity of the ocean bottom. But at least the models do not contradict the data. Right? Yeah, that's it.
The one more thing about this picture, because, and I also thinking, because the point also of these phase transitions is that the intermediate states are transition states, they are not stable.
Right.
And this also suggests this
Yes.
process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's still then a tipping point, but smoothed out over time. But the intermediate states are transition states, and it's actually not an equilibrium state. In that sense, it's
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think they ever did the analysis correcting these models. These are very expensive models in terms of running time and things like that. So it's not easy if you criticize their runs. I mean, they are answering your question. Yes, they are like 1 year in time to answer the question. But my point here is actually I don't care a lot if it's tipping or not. Could be tipping, it could not be tipping, but at least it has one characteristic of tipping, which is an abrupt change. Right? That's it. And whether it's tipping or not, I don't know. And also Siban says I don't know how to prove that. So you just stay away from that. And I think more people should do that probably. Now back to your
So does that mean you are saying that it may not be catastrophic collapse, but still it will collapse, or like
Yeah.
it may collapse?
Yeah, and
21.
and even they show in some models, they show this hysteretic loop, right? So there is potential tipping going on in at least part of those models for the AMOC. So it's, again, even without that, it's really enough because it has large consequences. This, I mean, at least for the European climate, it means Arctic ice could move into the Rotterdam ports. Really. So it's quite drastic, right?
It's 2,300,
Yeah, it's only 2,300. I mean, think about it, right? And also, if you look at this, so people say the collapse already began, right? So we already crossed the tipping point, right? I don't know. Well, about your connections, because this climate tipping points are connected, and indeed, what you say, there is now literature coming about like you have these tipping points, right? And now we assume that they are all tipping points and that they are all connected, and we tip one climate element, and then we have a domino effect, and then all the climate tipping elements will tip, right? And we get what they call in the literature a global tipping point. Well, in terms of tipping elements and whether they tip or not, I always go back to the IPCC report and see what is stated there about these climate tipping points, and they have much more nuanced kind of conclusions. It's like they say things like tipping cannot be ruled out. Of course, you can never rule it out. I mean, evidence is limited. Tipping is unlikely, right? This is the way that IPCC talks until now about this, right? And actually, I agree with that kind of phrasing. And tipping, as I showed, is highly model dependent. It's highly definition dependent. That's why people move away from this claim. And this is what Siebel and Drijfhout is calling it, a strong non-linear surprise, right? And there is a circle reasoning that confirms tipping all the time in literature. So we assume tipping, then we look at the data, and then we can conclude that we are approaching a tipping point, right? But they started out with the assumption that there is a tipping point a priori. And there's this going around in circles all the time in the literature. I mean, even literally, if you look at those, I mean, I like to read those literature a lot. Even they state sentences in the papers, Nature, Science, etc., right? Completely in the circle argument, even within one sentence. If we assume that there is a tipping point, then actually looking at this data, it is exactly confirming it. Yeah.
I don't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I don't. I mean,
No, but I don't think it's circle reasoning. If you go back to your first slide with the bimodality,
first slide.
where you start with the data plot.
Which
With
one?
the bimodality in the savanna.
Yeah. This one?
Yeah, this one. This is just data.
This is just data.
So there's no circle reasoning here.
No, here there's no circle reasoning. No, here's just bimodality. The point here is that the bimodality of the tree cover data is striking. There's no circle reasoning here. No. But the circle reasoning,
And this
okay, I
is
should
one
be,
indication of
the circle reasoning is where people apply early warning signals
yeah, okay.
and they look only at the time series data and then conclude we are approaching a tipping point. There is the circle reasoning. I could send you a paper in which it's just evident that they are just stuck in this circle reasoning, basically. Well, you can also, well, now let's not go into that because I need to finalize, I think. So then these kind of papers appear, right? Based on these arguments of cascading tipping, that we have a global tipping point to hothouse Earth, right? And again, this generates a lot of concern in the media and news and Guardian and New York Times, etc., etc., etc. But there is actually no one climate model that predicts that, and there is no one integrated assessment model that predicts that. And we know from the literature and we know from observations that at the global scale there is a relation between CO2 and global temperature that is strictly linear. So actually there is no scientific base for this kind of scenarios besides reasoning towards a worst case scenario, right? Reasoning towards, I mean, you can, and maybe that's useful, I don't know, but in the latest paper that came out about this just a couple of weeks ago, about the risk of a hot Earth scenario, a hothouse Earth scenario. And then what they do, what they basically do is, if you plot the CO2 and the global mean surface temperature, you get this strictly linear relationship, right? That we are talking about. And then they say, okay, this is this linear relationship, and now the Earth is here in this point. And then they argue we are like having an accelerated change. And then they start to speculate about all kinds of feedbacks and to reason towards this hothouse Earth scenario. But my alternative explanation is just, I mean, this can all be perfectly explained by just looking at CO2. It's a perfect linear relationship, right? I don't know how they come about with this. Like this deviates from this black line, right? Yeah, but here it deviates also, and here it deviates also. I mean, I don't know. I just don't see it. This scenario.
Previous claim that was in the ice age is always this typical example where we really see the phase transitions in the data. So it is possible. Or don't you believe in this ice age phase transitions?
This, you mean?
Yeah.
This plot is saying.
Yeah.
I don't know where we are looking at. I mean, I don't know. I mean, people always say like, yeah, but in paleo data you can actually confirm that there is a tipping because also the animal collapsed earlier. Yeah, but I just don't know whether it's a tipping or not. I mean, it could be something else that is changing that caused just a direct driver, right? I don't know. But actually, is it important? I think it's just a confusing thing, this tipping. It could be, this could be tipping or not, I don't know. But if you relate CO2 to global temperature, we know it's strictly linear, and that's in the IPCC. It's all there. It's the it's physics, right? So there's no that should not be a discussion, I think.
Isn't that in some sense also maybe a bit of a semantic discussion? And we always think of tipping as something happening rapidly, but what that means rapid is really dependent on your time scale. I mean,
Yes.
if I look at this picture of these ice age cycles, this looks like very rapid because we're looking at a very large time scale, but on a day-to-day basis, I mean, some cavemen living in a period wouldn't have seen tipping of the angle.
Plus also, what also can happen is that you have tipping and a very not abrupt change. I mean, it is not. I mean, there is an abrupt disappearance of an equilibrium, but it doesn't mean that the states variable will abruptly necessarily change. So indeed, it's complete. Well, I think we should move away from this and just look at data and interpret it in a. I don't know. Okay, but I will just finalize my talk in that I trust very much the IPCC kind of procedure and data. And I just want to end that I see, in terms of global tipping, I see just, not every, right? But I see just speculative papers in high profile journals causing a lot of alarm based on arguing towards the worst case scenario. But then I want to end with this slide. Is how to, if you think about are there tipping points or not, there is a whole uncertainty about it, right? So then the idea is like how to include that into scenarios and how include that into basically adaptive measures. And I think we have frameworks. There is a framework of scenario-based planning. There is a framework of adaptive pathways that we can use to implement the tipping point uncertainty, right? Saying like a priori that we don't need the tipping points in 2300 to take action now because we can already look outside and go to the IPCC scenarios and see what is going on, right? Without looking into the tipping point definitions. So that is how I end my talk. So we have, as I argued, ambiguous tipping points, at least in the simple models you have them, right? But in the data, I don't know, spatial scale matters. We should, instead of what happens in the literature, this uncertainty about tipping points and about their data is actually hidden under the carpet. And some authors do that deliberately. And that is maybe based on good arguments in that people want to provoke action and to provoke alarm, right? But I think it's a bad idea. So I think we should look at uncertainty and reveal that and uncover that and deal with the uncertainty, right? Given the fact that climate change is like not disputed and we should take action, right? And then we are thinking now about how to incorporate this uncertainty into scenario-based and adaptive measurements, right? And into scenario-based planning. And then I want to end with an advertisement that look out, this book is coming up in the summer, which contains a lot of nice information. And actually, this book is the main public for the book is graduate students. So it's a textbook for graduate students, which is very nice because it contains, like, our first author is such an enthusiastic teacher that he generates like a zillion questions with all the answers, so you can use it for teaching. Okay, that's it.
So, you say it doesn't really matter in a certain sense, but in terms
In
of
this context, right? Yeah.
no, but even in this context, because the interventions are different for if this is kind of spatial tipping point, so this or it's just a background variable that changes, so that does matter on what type of interventions you would actually. So if you want, one of your points was fighting the Sahara, so getting fighting the desert. So if you want to fight the desert and get, then this is important because it tells you something about what
Yes.
intervention could help or not help.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. And then for this specific example, I can tell you that spatial scale and spatial processes are extremely important. And there's nothing mysterious about it because farmers in the Sahel have known that for decades or even hundreds of years, because they have actually measures implementing like in a spatial manner how to regenerate the desert. Like they have localized techniques that they have only localized measures to get patches of vegetation back right in a spatial context. And when there is a slope, they know that if we put if we put stone ridges along the contour lines, then we know that the water that falls on the ground will flow down and will be stopped at the stone ridge, and behind the stone ridge the vegetation will recover. It's a completely spatial idea, and this, I mean, you can make models about it and generate a lot of data. But, so this is obvious.
One last question, and I'll be quick. But traditionally, in the early warnings, we look at the autocorrelations, and indeed that doesn't seem to work that well. But spatial correlations, this type of transitions, so I don't know much about it, but you can also look at the spatial correlations.
Yeah, but I can tell you it also doesn't really work.
Okay.
Because I myself have written a paper about how spatial configuration would lead to an early warning indicator for tipping. But I moved away from that because actually, if you look at the data and if you look at in more detail to models how they behave, then you see actually this behavior disappearing, and you know all about that kind of model, almost all. Yeah. Anyone else? So I don't know, what should we do with the tipping points? I mean, there is
I'm not that pessimistic.
pessimistic in terms.
Indeed, so in this case, you really have the spatial dimension, and that smooths things out. So you lose the classical, but we have a lot of other systems where we can still have this. But I think indeed we have to study these spatial systems better. But for me, the tipping point is also very much about the instability between these points. So it smooths it out, but it's really the state between in between is unstable, and that's still a fundamental point.
Yeah, right. So that I follow that. So if you look at the example that I showed you about the savanna and the tropical forest, the weird thing here is the bimodality, even on the 30 meter scale, you have this bimodality of tree cover. So you don't observe this 60%. Where is the 60% tree cover? That is fascinating. That's true. So on that scale, there's still something going on that is weird. Right? And that could be explained by tipping.
These vegetation patterns in the arid regions, these typical static circles or
Mhm.
diagonal pushes, but these are stable.
Yes.
These are intermediate states that are stable, but that in your classic tipping point description of ODEs, you won't see this. If you go to spatial dynamics, I mean, you even wrote papers about it. You were involved with, yeah, so, I mean, these patterns exist in between the two, well, the desert state and the savanna state, and are stable. So, I'm not sure if I agree with on that it's necessarily these intermediate states.
No, of course, of course. No, so if you just take the spatial IC model, then I'm correct, but yeah, there are
But,
much more interesting.
I think what Han is saying that if you have a well-mixed system that has no real spatial components, then you can still have this high stability or bimodality. And
Yeah,
it could be
but-
still that, yeah, I follow that, I follow that, but do you have an example of a real system that tips? Show me. People have been asking me for decades, I never could say,
Yeah,
yes, here it is.
But I think maybe something like permafrost, I mean,
When the
there's not really spatial interaction, it's just if you have several hot summers in a row, then permafrost will melt. I mean, there is no real spatial interaction going on or whatever, it's just if it's hot, it melts. And then it's really hard to get back to a permafrost state.
Yeah,
So maybe that's.
then it also generates greenhouse gases,
Yeah.
which is increase the temperature. Yeah, so I don't have it in this slides, but in these papers about hothouse Earth, people make now catalogs of positive and negative feedbacks. And they list like the strengths of positive feedbacks and the strengths of negative feedbacks. And the permafrost appears as one of those positive feedbacks.
But for me, the basic simple tipping point that we use in our educational program, that's just an idealized case, and you can only find them if you take very simple system, but it's just the freezing of water, yeah, that's just an example, that's relevant. And of course, whenever you go to a lake or whatever, things get more complicated, but if you go to really basic examples.
Yeah, I follow you,
Yeah, then you get to this single tipping point, but whenever you make it more realistic, you get multiple equilibria, you get the spatial dimension, but that's just complicating the idea of tipping points. So I still think that these phase transitions are crucial in understanding these complex systems.
Yeah.
But yeah, the very simple tipping points you will only see in idealized cases.
Yeah, I can follow you. I can actually follow you. Yeah.
And but it also
So I still teach tipping points to the students, but then I come with this, and then they're really confused.
Yeah.
But this goes back to Jay's point, I think, regarding the small spatial scale. No, in the
Yeah,
small
yeah.
spatial scale, I think then
It could still work like that.
simpler, systems, and then it can still tip. But larger spatial scales probably no. But also in shallow lakes, isn't that an example?
Yeah, that's an example. But then it has a reason why a lake is per definition spatially confined, and they are also shallow.
Yeah.
So there I can follow you can get tipping because it's a homogeneous, well mixed, spatially confined, shallow kind of system. And there's also experimental systems that they showed with Daphnias and light and things like that, that they can force tipping points in right?
Yeah. And
on a lab scale, on a small spatial scale. So I think there you can probably still see, but actually one of the worries in this context for me is that there are also that take, and like quite prominent ones, that take this idea of tipping point and misuse it to provoke climate action.
I won't worry too much about that, but
I do worry about that because if in 10 years or in 20 years time no one sees tipping ever, then what is the credibility of all those people? And those people they are very influential. And besides that, you have this IPCC report, right? But the tipping point crowd now produces a regular, what they call global tipping point report to counteract the IPCC. Right? So, I mean, this is serious business. This is serious business. To me, I worry about it.
But I'm also thinking about connectivity. Going back to why I was also interested in this, because in our project we do polarization, but also segregation. And polarization in communities. So now we talk certainly about political attitudes, and we are also one message of your story is that if you have a spatial configuration and connectivity is actually local, that actually prevents these sudden transitions. But what we now see in political polarization, because the world is so connected and you have internet and everybody can connect to everybody over the world, these things go much faster. So there we see much more abrupt transitions. And that's actually quite interesting to understand. So as soon as this connectivity, now I guess in certain climate systems, the connectivity may be long range, and then you will get you will get back to the more simplistic tipping points, I think. So it also depends a bit on the local or global size of the connectivity. And I don't know about that, how that works here, because certain mechanisms are connecting everything in the climate system.
Yeah, I can follow that, and especially especially if you think about the AMO.
Yeah.
Then I still think that tipping is very unlikely, but I disagree there with, for example, Jan Dijkstra, who said, well, it's all connected, it's very, very homogeneous connected system. And then sometimes I see these pictures with all those local currents and this eddies, and then I think, well, I don't think it's very homogeneous, but well, yeah, I can follow. Actually, yeah, I can follow what you said. Yeah. So in terms of the AMOC, I'm not so sure if there's no tipping. I mean, I think there could still be tipping, but even without tipping, it's worrisome enough, I think.
I don't fully understand this discussion because it seems like there's many models, right? Some that maybe show this phase transition, some that it seems more dynamic or continuous. But it seemed like from the data you had that there's no way you can choose which model is the right thing.
No.
So I don't know, I don't understand so much the criticism of the big points because there's no way to discern the model, at least for these two systems. You have a little patch of blue direct observation.
Yeah, that's why this guy that produces this papers, Steven Dijkstra, he is now retired, but he stays away from that discussion.
No, I understand, but it doesn't exclude the possibility.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, there's one story I tell everybody always, because somehow not many people know this, but we have the famous L'Aquila earthquake case. And these were the scientists or earthquake specialists in Italy in 2009, and they had to predict earthquakes, which is a clear tipping point. And they have all this data, so they have a very good model of earthquakes, so very much more precise than I have or you have. So this is just so the physical model is excellent, and they have all these seismographic measurements everywhere, and then they have to predict earthquake. And then they really have this type 1, type 2 decision, because they either tell people to leave their houses and work and or not. And it's a big decision, because if you do this false alarm too often, people don't believe you anymore. And this is a case where they said they had indications that an earthquake was coming, and they said, no, it's not enough. Don't stay at home. Then I forgot, but about 400 people died. Because they were wrong. They stayed at home, and then they were convicted for 7 years jail. These scientists, because they interpreted the early warning wrong. And this is a famous case, but really shocking, because they tried to do early warnings and they were wrong and put in jail for 7 years. So
Yeah, this is very
they were actually not put in the long term. They won the case, but initially they were convicted to 7 years jail. Really famous story. It's an amazing story in Belgium. And if they cannot do early warnings in that case,
and we cannot.
yeah, maybe you can, but in psychology we can forget about it. Yeah.
No, that's very interesting.
Look up the case. It's an amazing story. If you, yeah. Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah. Perfect.
Why did you put the picture of that art polygons that clip on the
Sorry, what was
that picture on the book cover, the art polygon
Yeah.
of the tube?
Yeah, I suggested to put a question mark here, but it didn't survive. Because also you need to sell a book. Yeah, right. So that's what the mechanism of this, right? So I didn't agree about this, but yeah. So I'm basically advocating against global tipping, and then I produce a book like this.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Lunch.